Welcome to Still Left Out, the podcast. I am really delighted to be stealing some time away from Cheri Honkala, who has an enormous resume of activism, but is right now in the center of what's going on in Philadelphia with the slaying of the young man. So we want to get to that story, but first, real quick, Cheri Honkala and I have maybe two things in common: a passion for homelessness, and we both ran for vice president for the Green Party, which that has not gotten me a cup of coffee yet anywhere telling people that. So, but it is, I remember when you were nominated in 2012, I was so delighted because I've admired you from an enormous distance for so long. You are just a remarkable woman. You had a really tough childhood from legend, you know, and then you, like, the one thing I always try to yak at the middle and upper classes about is that poor folk don't come from the rich. It isn't a story of the poor folk screwed up and fell into poverty. Poor folk come from other poor folk. So when they're in really bad trouble, their mother can't necessarily take them in because her landlord's going to throw her out because he didn't lease that apartment for a mom, a grandmom, and 4 children. So, you know, the idea that there is some basic comfort level in the United States and every now and then someone falls out of it is just the absurdity of all. But your life story is really that very public life story of a kid from poverty who then tried to raise her own family in poverty. And your son has done, I mean, he's literally a movie star. So, so you've done an amazing job with that. But you never forgot the other people who were in the same boat. So if you want to, before we move over to Philadelphia, if you want to give maybe a quick synopsis of how you were able to keep perspective, because you and I both know people who, once they get out of homelessness, they never want to talk about it again, let alone become the public face of it.
Yeah. So like you said, Pat, I'm happy to be on your show. I have had a very hard life, and I think it just continues. I grew up in poverty, lived in 9 different institutions before I was 16 years old, was taken from my mother, and, have basically then, grew up. And at 16, I became pregnant and became a teenage mom and did the whole bit of living in my car and began doing housing takeovers. Actually pioneered it in many different ways, starting in the Midwest and then across the country, and am still living here in Kensington. My oldest son, who was homeless when he was 9 years old, went on to become a celebrity, a filmmaker. He's got a film that's out now. And the difficult thing is that I'm still in poverty. Some people like to do like a rags to riches, and like, Cheri's choosing the direction of Mother Teresa. And that's actually not my story. My story is, it's kind of like, if you know, you owe. And so my son and his wife give money to the organization, the Poor People's Army, which is a collective, as opposed to, myself as an individual. So I still live below the federal poverty level. It's not a choice.
Right.
It's kind of like seeing kids on a railroad track and you push them out of the way. That's not really a choice.
Right.
So Yeah.
Now, if someone else wanted to help the way your son and daughter-in-law do, is there a quick way that people could send some money and help your organization?
Yes, absolutely. They could either send it to me by way of Venmo right now, because there's a lot going on, or they can also send it to economichumanrights.org, and they can get a tax deductible, they can make a tax deductible contribution.
And Max, our producer, will put that information underneath the YouTube video so that people can see where they can send their money.
Fantastic. That's
Yeah, because
wonderful.
I don't know why people wait for that information till the end of the show. Like, let's get that out right away.
I know, my God.
This work doesn't do itself, and it's a really big deal. So you are, I think we need to have you back on again because I really want to talk about the occupation of abandoned and unused government buildings to house the people of the United States who should have an inalienable right to housing in the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness categories. But so much is going on. I first learned about squatting and people actually asserting their rights to housing when I lived in Amsterdam. I went to grad school in Amsterdam, and that was so incredibly successful there. Um, Probably about the same time you started doing it. Um,
In the 80s?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the thing is that that the Netherlands learned and started having basic human rights for housing.
Oh, yeah.
You've got harder heads to knock in this
Yeah.
country, you know, which the 80s was when they really started moving away from all the war on poverty
Yeah.
and to the war on the poor. So, but we will get you back on. We'll talk about these great things that you do. In the meantime, you know, if you've got $10, send it and support because especially right now, first of all, it's getting cold, so housing becomes a really big issue. And second of all, there's just chaos right now in Philadelphia. So tell us what happened. What happened with the shooting, and then what is happening in Philly now?
Um, well, there was an autistic man whose mother ran behind him in West Philadelphia, and because he had a knife and he was having a meltdown. And she had called the police in advance and said that her son was in crisis. And so the Philadelphia Police Department showed up, and two officers shot him several times, and he died. And so he was shot in front of his mother in West Philadelphia, very close to where in 1985, the city has never recovered from the move bombing, where we had a Democratic Party mayor, black mayor, Wilson Good, and police department under Rizzo, and they dropped a bomb and killed several people. So, and Mumia to this day is still incarcerated. He was a journalist at the time that was covering what was taking place. So it's really quite odd because the day before all of this happened, I just saw Pam Africa at Church of the Overcomer, and we were sitting there and we were chatting about the housing takeovers that I'm engaged in here right now in Philadelphia. And little did I know the entire city would be involved in an uprising because of the killing of Walter Wallace Jr.
So we've seen a lot of, you know, the video that comes out, and as a former journalist, I honor the work that they're doing. It is really tough. I mean, you and I both have the media 1,000 times because the way they treat our, not only our topic, but our political leaning. That is the biggest problem with the current president is there's a grain of truth in every lie he tells. And when he says the media sucks, as a former member of the media, there's enough truth in that so that people want to believe him about everything. But right now I am grateful to at least be getting some pictures out of Philadelphia. But have you been able, when you're living there, you don't have time to flick on the TV, but have you been able to see much of the reporting? Is what you're seeing accurate?
Most of the reporting that I'm seeing on television, the narrative is not accurate. uh, there's a lot of emphasis on, the poor looting of the stores, poor Target, poor Walmart, AutoZone, and, really a concerted effort to stay away from the real issue at hand, which is, domestic terrorism that's taking place right now. Philadelphia is one of the largest, poorest cities in the country, and they don't have looting in Chestnut Hill or Mount Airy or where the main line. And there's a reason for it. You can't take a starving person and put them in the middle of a store and then not expect them to eat. And many of we're learning now from my hometown, Minnesota, that a lot of right-wing groups and undercover police officers were, really engaged, like the Umbrella Man, in, smashing windows and setting up situations so that, people would be, take those shoes or take that bread or take those diapers or whatever. And so the focus becomes on, let's all of us, go after those bad individuals, those bad people in Philadelphia, meaning Black, meaning poor, those looters, and staying away from a conversation about killing a child in front of his mother that had a disability. That's actually where the outrage should be. Is, how did we in the same neighborhood with that kind of trauma known across the country and around the world, did, two police officers backed up by an administration, again, a Democratic mayor, and this is the headquarters for the Biden campaign, have a situation where, instead of mental health services being called to de-escalate the situation, instead of using a taser, instead of shooting him in his foot, or there was 2 or 3 police officers disarming him. Instead, they decided to shoot him in cold blood in front of his mother. And if people watch the video, it's very traumatizing because, his mother and all the neighbors are pleading, basically not to shoot him and not to kill him.
Yeah, if you have time to plead, there's
Pardon?
time to plead. There, it just feels like there's time to find another solution. I'm the kid of Irish immigrants. My mom's whole family came from Ireland, and there, for people who don't understand, and the analogy I love is, if you think that you're a pro police in all things, but when you're driving down the highway and you see someone with their lights on behind you, you don't look at your own speed limit, then you have denied the fact that you want to hide from the cops too. You're speeding, you see, even if you're 5 over the limit or you're not even speeding, the minute you see those cop lights, you're like, oh crap, what's going to happen to me? Am I speeding? And you want to evade. That's why people buy radar detectors, right? Because they're trying to avoid the police. So this is the middle and upper middle class that think they are pro police until they're going to get a $195 ticket, and then they're completely anti-police. But when I was a kid, I was brought up by people from Ireland who thought the police, it was the culture that the police were the last people in the world you called because heads were going to get broken. That was the end of the story. That's how I grew up with the feeling. If something was going bad in my house, the absolute last person on the list to call would have been a cop. and and I didn't really even understand it when I was a kid. But if there was domestic violence, which there was plenty of, we didn't call the police. We didn't call anybody on our own people anyway. But it's when people call me and they say there's a homeless guy sleeping in the park, or and it's 10 degrees out and I'm scared. My answer is always, if you absolutely can't stop yourself, call an ambulance. Do not call a police person, call an ambulance, because your concern is for their health, not, and that's not to denigrate the cops, except we all know that they are trained to go after things in one way. And that one solution, that whole, if all you own is a hammer, everything is a nail solution thing, is not helpful. And I don't know what's in a person's mind when they stare at someone with everyone pleading for their lives and they still shoot.
Yeah,
there's another layer of what is that person, what has been ingrained into that person's head that they can still pull that trigger.
Yeah, I just really don't know. This issue hit me really hard too, because I have an autistic son, and when George Floyd was murdered by the police, and he's 18, and he's been very active in the demonstrations in Philadelphia. And one of the last demonstrations he was involved in of Black Lives Matter, he was one of the kids that was sprayed with the tear gas, and we're a class action suit right now in Philadelphia against the police department for putting a lot of people in danger by shooting the tear gas when he was just with his friends standing on the side of the embankment. So this has just impacted me very deeply, because I have a Puerto Rican autistic kid that's engaged in a lawsuit right now against the Philadelphia Police Department. And he just called me up and said, Mom, I really need to take a mental health day today. Because, my heart really goes out, and I'm really thinking about all the young, all the Black youth across this city, and anybody with a disability, and how this must be just causing a whole host of extra trauma for them. It's, we're all, we're fighters, but we're all very human during this fight. So,
right. Well, Cheri,
my heart goes out to all of them.
Yeah, you've brought up so many important issues. The issues of when you have no property and you have nothing, and you're trying to survive. How does chaos affect you? Because when you're, I don't know anyone right now who's sleeping well. No matter how protected they are, they're not sleeping well. The stress of our current time and not being able to see our families, and just ignorance from leadership on all sides at times, is just so demoralizing. And then to be also not knowing how to feed your children, having housing insecurity and chaos on top of that. It is just, if you can't empathize for 5 seconds with how really difficult it is right now to be at the very bottom of this country, socioeconomically, it's criminal. But you've touched on that, and you've touched on the problem of our John Wayne response to every issue that's brought forward in the country, where you come in with guns ablazing and let God sort it out, which, you know, it doesn't work, especially when the bad guys are on the side of racism, and the bad guys, you know, the powerful guys are operating from that, whether they know it or not. You know, that's the other thing I'm really learning in this is my catchphrase for this year is unearned privilege, which I have. And it's the hardest thing for white people to understand is not only are you privileged, but you didn't do a single thing to deserve it. You were born white and you have this unearned privilege, and that gives you a big chip on your shoulder. And that is such an important thing as you figure all that back into the mix. Anyway, we don't want to keep you. We know it's crazy there and that you have things you need to do. We're going to be worried about you though. So keep us posted. Let us know how your son is, you know. Again, we'll get a Venmo link or whatever we need so that folks can help, you know, with the cause. And I appreciate you taking the time in this really hectic, crazy time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'd love to come back anytime. People can follow us on our Facebook, or they can follow us at economichumanrights.org. And, you know, I just think the most important thing right now for us and for all of our children is to teach them how to be critical thinkers and how to lift each other's morale up during a very difficult time. And don't give up the fight, because the ancestors are calling on us to make sure that we play our historic duty in making this a better world for our children.
Awesome.
Thanks, Pat.
Wonderful. Take care, Cheri.